I'd like to do an acknowledgement to country, and I would like to acknowledge the Gadigal of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians of this land, and pay my respects to the elders, both past and present. Folks, today is a big morning for all of us. We're a couple of days out from obviously the federal election, and we're absolutely delighted to have an opportunity to meet with three of our outstanding leaders in the federal parliament, to meet with them, to engage in dialogue with them, to unpack some of their policy platforms, and to really get a sense of what does this mean not only for us as a sector but for us as a country. I've always been a big believer, came to political age, if you will, during the pretty amazing Hawke-Keating early 80s, where Australia completely transformed. And that was then built on and has been built on by successive generations. I've always believed that politics matters. I always believe that elections matter. And I always believe that the future of the country is at stake every time, every 3 years, where we come together to make a decision. And so in that context, from NIBA's perspective, because we are the voice of the sector, of the broking profession, because we are a large and powerful community, it's important for us to come together and engage politically to help shape some of the future of our country with our political leaders. I'll be back in a moment with a little bit more, but first things first, absolutely delighted to welcome Nick Cook, President of NIBA, to say a few words. Please extend a very warm welcome to Nick.
Thanks, Richard, and good morning, everyone. This has been a fantastic initiative for NIBA to kick off, and we're so thrilled to see a room full of people and having the calibre of the panel that we have this morning. So thanks for your support. And it's these kinds of initiatives and how we can move NIBA to keep with the times that we'll be looking to roll out over the course of my presidency. I want to just spend a couple of minutes with you this morning, just give you a bit of an outline of what's on my mind and where I think NIBA can add a lot of value, not just to our clients, but to the broader community, which is so important at these changing times. And that's really where NIBA's strength lies, in our role and advocacy. We continue to be the unified voice for brokers. That can't be underestimated, having one voice across the whole of the industry when we talk to government, when we talk to authorities, when we talk to community groups, we speak as one. And that's very reflective of the board we have, and it's a wonderful board that you've got in respect to the NIBA board, as well as a fantastic NIBA team led so capably by Richard. So it's in these times of local and global challenges such as climate-related risks, economic volatility and regulatory shifts that NIBA plays that important role, bringing people together and formulating our approach for the best way to look after our clients and the communities that they are living and operating within. So advocacy is a key part. Another part is adaptability. Adaptability is so symptomatic, isn't it, of the world we're in today. We've got, as I said, the climate-related risk, and we've got this growing protection gap. Richard and I and the past president, immediate past president, Gary Oakley, recently went to the World Federation of Insurance Intermediaries meeting in Washington. And that brings together all the NIBA equivalents from around the world, BIBA in the UK and the various groups, including the US, who were hosting the event. The most common discussion point we had was around the protection gap, the affordability and the availability of insurance. This is a gap that's getting wider, and we're seeing what's happened in the States, in particular with California. And we also see on the nightly news, I was watching the latest CPI figures last night, and there is insurance is one of the drivers of that pressure on CPI. So this is something that we can't lose sight of, that customers are really facing problems around A, accessing insurance, and B, at an affordable price. So as brokers, we're right in the middle of that, and that's a key part of the role we play. And that's where our convention theme, Shaping Change, the NIBA convention. Tickets are on sale, selling fast, so getting quick. Is on the Gold Coast this year, the spiritual home for NIBA. But the theme of shaping change is so important. It highlights the innovation and adapting in the broking profession. Brokers are encouraged to leverage technology and really foster a culture of collaboration. This, for me, is a really important part. It's not one particular group solution, it's how we all work together. And as NIBA, coming back to that central theme of unifying, this is where collaboration between all our stakeholders, be insurer, government, regulators, and of course brokers, we play an increasingly important role of bringing those groups together. So fostering collaboration and then moving through to how we bring people through our industry. One of the greatest challenges we have is attracting and retaining people within insurance. And this is something through the NIBA initiatives such as Insure Your Future, that we're now on the front foot in a more cohesive way of attracting people into our profession, which is a wonderful profession and one, as I said, that's very exciting with everything going on. So finally, in amongst all that, if you like, macro challenges are the more immediate pieces, and that is certainly currently the Code of Practice review that we're doing. The Code of Practice, the Insurance Brokers Code of Practice, is so important. Why? Because it is the way by which we manage ourselves, our expectations of each other, the professionals that we want to be. We don't want someone overseeing and directing us. We want to provide that level of confidence that we have a code that is robust and has customers at the centre of it, everything we do. So we're currently through the first phase of that review. We've appointed an independent reviewer, as many of you would know, Phil Curry, who is leading that work. We're through that first range of interviews. Submissions are open till tomorrow afternoon on that first paper that Phil's done, and we'll work as we go through over the months ahead in refining what is an update to our Code of Practice. But it is really central to how we conduct ourselves and how others measure and see the insurance broking profession. So thanks again for joining us. It's going to be a wonderful morning ahead. I'd like to, as I said, thank our NIBA board, thank the NIBA executive for putting on such a wonderful morning this morning. Looking forward to working with my Vice President, Rebecca Wilson, and have a great morning, everyone. Thank you very much. Thanks, Richard.
Big thank you and welcome to all of the NIBA members in the room, to our industry colleagues and partners, to many of our key stakeholders in the room, and of course to our association colleagues. It's a highly collaborative sector and it's fantastic to see so many of them in the room with us. Look, the order of the day is going to be pretty straightforward. We're delighted to be joined by Minister Jones, who we've invited to say a few words right up front. That's going to be followed by a bit of a Q&A, fireside chat. There's an opportunity, of course, to engage. This is a dialogue, so for those of you who are used to using Slido, just scan the QR code, send in your question, it'll turn up on the iPad, it'll help us drive and guide the conversation. We're then going to be welcoming Ms Steggall to the podium for a similar stump speech, if you will, followed by a Q&A with Nick Cook. And then finally, Senator Bragg will be with us and it'll be the same process. So designed to be very engaged, very engaging. Please feel free to ask some questions. And so with that, let me take a moment to welcome our first speaker, and delighted to have Minister Jones in. He'll confirm for us this is likely to be one of his very last sector presentations. A little bit about Minister Jones. He is the federal member for Whitlam, and he has served as the Assistant Treasurer and the Minister for Financial Services since 2022. He was first elected in 2010, representing the Southern Illawarra region. And before entering politics, Minister Jones was a youth advocate. He supported children with disabilities and adults with spinal cord injuries. He also worked as a lawyer with the ACTU and later as National Secretary of the Community and Public Sector Union. We've worked closely with Minister Jones, followed his agenda really closely on scams, on reform of the sector, on all the initiatives that he's brought to the table. We've been I think, very fortunate, we've said this publicly before, to have a minister of this calibre with his level of understanding as the minister who oversees this particular sector.
Wonderful to be with you. I reckon I should sit down and stop now. I think I can only go backwards after those very warm words of introduction by you. I want to start by acknowledging that this wonderful hotel and this beautiful city is on the land of the Eora people of the Gadigal Nation. Sorry, the other way around. The Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Obviously extend that to any First Nations people who are here in the room. Delighted to be here in one of my last gigs with my parliamentary colleague, Zali Steggall. I understand Andrew Bragg will be here soon, if he's not already. I want to acknowledge both Andrew and Zali. Richard and your team, thank you so much for the engagement. Outgoing President Gary, congratulations. I understand there's been an election already, so I want to extend my congratulations to incoming President Nick and your Deputy Rebecca. I'm sure you're going to continue to do a great job representing this really important industry. We are in the middle of an election campaign. You'd be surprised if I didn't make a few observations about that, I assume. Look, one of the great things, I've got a speech here, there's about 45 pages, so I thought I'd read it all slowly, or I could go a bit off message, or a bit off pitch and just make a few observations, which is what I'd prefer to do. Look, one of the great things, however willing Australian elections get, one of the great things about democracy done Australian style, it is, for the most part, it is overseen by a very independent process. We have peaceful elections and peaceful transitions for government in this country, and I think as we go through the final days of what seems like a 5-year election campaign, I think we should celebrate the fact that we have a good quality of democracy in this country when we compare it to a lot of other countries around the world, and that, in my view, is a testament to the quality of the participants in that process. I'm hopeful and quite confident that the government will be returned, and I think that's important. We've embarked on a number of reform processes, all of which take more than a year or two to put into place, and all of which take more than 3 years to bed down. I see the reform process is like a tree which needs to send its roots deep into the ground so that another wind that comes through doesn't blow that tree over. And if you look at the big things that we define ourselves by as a nation, whether it's Medicare, whether it's the NDIS, whether it's our, the tax reform programs, or the big changes that have been made by successive governments over the last 100 years or so, they've all required long-term governments to be able to put those reforms in place to ensure the reforms stick. And we've been working on a number of them within the financial services industry, including in the insurance area, and I'd make the same observations about that. Had a quick word to Zali while we were sitting down and coming in. I think whilst there are a bunch of things we disagree on, there's one thing that we really do agree on, and that is the centrality of insurance in directing economic activity throughout the economy, and the importance therefore of the affordability of insurance, not just to households but also to businesses small and large, to ensure that they can defray risk, meet their statutory obligations, and ensure that they can afford to do those things through an appropriate insurance product. What we've seen over the last 4 or 5 years, as Nick alluded to in his introduction, no industry, by the way, wants to have a line item in the CPI figures. No industry. And for the last couple of years, the insurance industry has. And that's been as a result of a perfect storm of factors, no pun intended, that have been visited upon the industry. Some of them, the long tail of the COVID pandemic, others quite unique. Some of the big, it's worth pointing some of these things out because when we're looking for solutions, if you're not understanding what the underlying problems are, then you're solving the wrong thing. The Actuaries Institute, of data that has been well ventilated in this forum and others, has pointed out there's around about 12% of Australian households which are affordability stressed with insurance. This means they need to spend more than 4 weeks of gross annual income on paying for their insurance. And what that effectively means is they're not doing it. Because if some of a household is having to spend 4 weeks of their gross income on insurance, they're effectively, that household or that business is effectively not taking out appropriate cover. So calling out the causes, the drivers of this affordability issue is an important part of the challenge for us as governments and policymakers to resolve. The reinsurance market has been a big part of this. Global insured losses have doubled over the past decade as Australians are impacted by floods through the driver of reinsurance markets in France and the chaos in California, in fact all around the world, whether it's Europe, whether it's Southeast Asia, whether it's North America. Big weather events impact the price that Australians are paying through their insurance premiums, 30% of which is up to 30% of which can be driven by the reinsurance cost of that product. Started to come down, but it is still a significant driver. It's why one of the first acts that I engaged in when I became the Minister was to take a delegation of our insurers up to Europe and meet with and talk to the big global reinsurers to explain what we're doing, particularly in the area of mitigation, and to speak with one voice to the big reinsurance markets of the world. And I think it stood us well as a country and an industry, and it's something that I hope my successor takes up as a practice. I think it's an important thing to do. Not only has there been pressure on the reinsurance side of things, it's just simply a fact that as house prices have escalated in the area of the housing products, then so too is the cost of replacing either in whole or in part that house. So, the big jump up in asset prices over the last 4 years has fed into the cost of insurance and is driving that affordability issue. The cost of building materials and labour has had a significant impact, in fact, right across all of the general insurance categories, particularly housing, also auto, not exclusive to those areas. We've seen some of the pressure come off building materials, but it's definitely still there in quite a tight labour market. The third big driver is the risk factor, and I was very pleased to see the Insurance Council of Australia President CEO Andrew Hall out last week, calling out the fact that we are still doing dumb things. We are still building new suburbs in harm's way in areas that we know are flood zones at the very same time as governments, state, federal and local, are writing cheques for flood repair and replacement in high flood risk zones up and down the coast of Australia. This has got to stop. We cannot expect that we're going to have a meaningful impact on insurance affordability when we are flooding the pool of insured properties with high risk housing in areas that we know at the point that we are putting a for sale sign on the block that this property is going to flood. We have got to stop doing dumb things. And of course, the force multiplier in all of this is climate change. Because whilst it's absolute madness to be building places in homes in zones that we know are of high flood risk today, the force multiplier of climate change means the places that have been hitherto quite safe are now increasingly in harm's way. Climate change is where environmental policy meets economic policy, and it's driving up the price of everything we do. So a serious policy around insurance affordability has got to deal with risk mitigation, but it has also got to deal with the big long-term and global impacts of climate change. Yes, we've got to do mitigation, but we've also got to avoid the worst and the greatest impacts of climate change for generations to come. I think these are the big drivers and we're focused in on these as a government. We're trying to get a coordinated approach across state and territory governments and local governments and around land reuse planning. We're improving the data sets and ensuring that we're utilising the data that is available to insurers and reinsurers and emergency agencies to ensure that we can do better in the area of mitigation through the National Hazard Insurance Partnership. These are all good initiatives and we should double down on these and ensure that we make greater use of them, but none of them on their own are going to work unless we're dealing with the risk issue. That has to be at front and centre of our efforts. Can I finally, before we do a little bit of Q&A, talk a little bit about the profession? Firstly, about the role that insurance brokers play, the Code of Practice review which you're engaged in, and more broadly the financial services and financial advice profession. Nick, you've told the group here that you will be focusing on the Code of Practice review. I welcome that. I welcome that. No government wants to be solving problems that don't exist. But if we have problems across any of the financial advice areas, and those problems are generating consumer harms, then a government will have to act. We've got plenty of things on our plate at the moment. So we encourage you to lean into the process of improving the Code of Practice and modernising and updating the Code of Practice. We have seen the results of inaction in other areas where professions have failed to modernise and failed to lean into very real challenges that exist across industries. More broadly, we think that insurance brokers play a critical role. I note the fact that you're not well represented in AFCA complaints, so I hope that continues. I hope that continues. We think brokers play an absolutely critical role in dealing with information asymmetry in a marketplace where insurance is under stress and when the price of insurance is creating stresses on businesses and households. So we think you have an absolutely critical role to play in providing the right sort of advice and information to your customers to ensure they get the best deal available, and when an event does occur, that they get their entitlements paid out promptly and in accordance with the contract. So welcome that. More broadly across the financial services industry, and particularly in the area of financial advice, we've got a big problem. It's not just in insurance where we have a problem with information asymmetry. I've focused in my role over the last 3 years in the area of financial advice, particularly in the area of retirement advice, because I think it's the biggest part of the biggest problem. We've got 16,000 when we came into government. Over the previous 4 years to us coming into government, the financial advice profession have been sliced in half. 16,000 remaining professional financial advisors, and regulatory systems which were frankly outdated, designed to protect consumers from bad advice. They've done that very well, but they're also protecting consumers from good advice, and that cannot stand. So a rework of the financial advice laws, looking at the entry points into the profession, updating and modernising all of that to ensure that we can get more financial advisors in, but also ensure that there are more safe doors for people to walk through to get access to good financial advice and information. We're about 2/3 of the way through on that project. I'm a big advocate for 4-year terms, because if we had another year on this term, that project will have been completed, but I'm confident that enough momentum has been put in place behind that to ensure that we will have a better industry, a stronger industry, and better for consumers, more safe doors for people to get access to the advice. Finally, can I say, I've thoroughly enjoyed the engagement that I've had with the broking profession through your professional associations. I echo the point that Nick made in his introduction. Having consultable bodies, the government knows are representative, authentic representative bodies of the entire industry, makes the world of difference. When you've got problems and challenges, you know who to go to, you know who to pick up the phone to, you know which phone calls to take, and having a professional consultable body matters. So I can congratulate NIBA for the great work they do across industry, thank them for the engagement that you've had with me, but also more broadly across the insurance sector. I've thoroughly enjoyed working with you. I'm sure we won't be strangers in years to come, but thanks for the opportunity to share a few thoughts with you this morning. Cheers.
Off the cuff, I'm glad you tossed the 45-pager away. That was a really illuminating and very real conversation, so thank you for that. Folks, Slido is here. The questions will turn up, so please feel free to have the conversation. We've got a short period of time, Minister. You're finishing, we were talking just before, you're finishing your political career as Federal Minister. How are you feeling about the journey you've been on and kind of what lies ahead?
Well, I've been talking to Zali about what the last 5 weeks have been like for her, and I don't feel any envy, I've got to say. I've thoroughly enjoyed. I've been, look, either directly or indirect. I've been the guy with his name on the form for 15 years, and for another 15 years before that, directly involved in every state, federal and local election campaign that we've had over that 30-year period. Thoroughly enjoyed it. I love democracy, done Australian style. No two elections are the same, but you've got to know when it's time. And I always said to myself I wanted to work that out before anyone else did. And I wanted to leave when I felt like I was had more to give, but it was the top of what I was doing. So feeling good about that. Love the work that I've done inside this industry, the engagement that I've had, the challenges that we've confronted together. But I'm looking forward to the next challenge, whatever that may be.
You spoke about kind of the transformation and the big issues and good advice and so on. What do you feel you've left on the table that you would have wanted to achieve in that 4th year that never...
Look, the process of government is, you know, in any 3-year period, there'll be things that you receive from the previous administration and the previous government, and you finish. There'll be things that you start that you hand over to the next person who takes on the job. I focused on financial advice because I thought we had a real crisis. I think I might have described it colourfully as a bin fire of problems that I thought needed to be resolved. A lot of big voices, a lot of big interests, quite a complex problem to resolve. But I think investing time on relationships, investing time on getting right inside the problem, being very upfront about the problem you're trying to solve and using that as the touchstone of every policy decision you made set us up well. There's frustration, I know, that we didn't complete everything, but I'm very confident that this is a job that, if we just maintain the policy settings that have been announced, will be completed this year. It's good to go, and I think Australians will be better off as a result of that, having access to better advice through more safe forums. I think Australians will be better off. Wish it was me who was going to be putting my name on the press release that said this is done.
Yeah. You mentioned the ICA. Andrew and his team are with us today.
Oh, I didn't know that. Well, there you go.
There he is.
Hello.
They did make a big call out. I just wanted to unpack a little further. You know, we sit at as a profession, we sit at the vanguard of engaging with clients and understanding the risks and so on. But like you say, if you're building properties in places that will flood, you know, insurance is an answer, but it's kind of after the fact.
Yep.
Perhaps just unpack a little more of your thinking about how do we as a country kind of get ready so that we're actually steering into those really big decisions, whether it's floods or fires, etc., so that that's the end of the conversation we're focusing on rather than the insurance solving problem at the other end.
Look, you don't get sensible policy solutions if you don't have a sensible policy debate. So controlling the narrative in all of this is absolutely critical. In my first stand up in the industry after coming into government 3 years ago, I said very plainly what I thought the problem was in the insurance affordability area, and it was about risk mitigation and risk management. Everything after that is subsidiary. I made it quite clear that that was going to be our priority. So just having honest conversations with people, they mightn't like what you're saying, but they'll like it even less if they discover a week or two later that you've been misleading them. So just having honest conversations with people over a long period of time about what the cause of the problem is that they're encountering. So from a household perspective, you talk to somebody and you say, well, your house has actually gone up 50% in value over the last 4 years. And that's a very real number for a lot of households, particularly in this area. If your house has gone up by 50% in the last 4 years, what do you think the price of replacing your house is going to be if a tragic event occurs? So do you think that should be reflected in your insurance premium? The conversation that I'm passionate about, which describes stopping doing dumb things. If we know at the point of sale of a block of land that it is going to be flood affected at least once over the next decade, we should be declaring that and saying that up front, because that is a part of the cost of owning that property, is the fact that it is going to be wiped out by or significantly flood affected over a period of time. If we know that in parts of Australia climate change is not a future event, it's actually happening now, and it is impacting on the economic cost of owning a property or running a business, we've got to call it out and say it, and not pretend to people that these aren't real factors that are having real economic and cost impacts on the way we do business or the way we live our lives. So those honest, frank conversations, people mightn't like it at first, but they get it over a period of time, and that creates the bedrock for decent reform.
And do you reckon that's a sector-led conversation or a political-led conversation?
Look, I can't think of a sector which has more skin in the game than the insurance sector, frankly, because you're essentially the price allocator for climate change risk in the economy. So I can't think of a sector that has got more skin in the game, which is why I have welcomed, not over 3 years, not over 10 years, like you were the first industry into the conversation saying this is going to have a significant economic impact, and that is welcome. For your sector, it's not about saving frogs or trees, it's actually about saving balance sheets, and people have got to understand it's actually an economic thing. I care about all the social stuff, I care about all the environmental stuff, but it's actually an economic issue, and people have got to understand that.
There are a lot of questions on that topic. Another set of questions that have come through are on just further on the theme around affordability. So there's a couple of questions on affordability. What's the likelihood of big Nat Cat events taking place impacting affordability? The global market you spoke about, government taxes and take out of insurance premiums. How do we have a kind of more sensible conversation around affordability that kind of, I suppose, distills the key issues that are actually out there, so that people are making debate with the fact that, hey, this is a big issue for all of us. It's not just local, it is global, together with the government tax component.
Yeah, look, I think pressure is building in the system to make those sorts of conversations more possible. I welcome the fact that Chris Minns and Daniel Mookie have, started taking this issue on in New South Wales with the emergency services levy, which is a truly dumb tax. I welcome the fact that they've taken that issue on. I think that bodes well, but I think more needs to be done in this area. Tax is a revenue raiser, but it's also a director of economic activity, and in this area nobody could argue that we've got the tax settings right. So I think there needs to be a joined up conversation, state and federal, We can't deny the fact that stamp duty is a significant revenue source for cash-strapped state governments, but we also need to acknowledge that if people are underinsured, then governments are the underwriters of last resort, and they're picking up the bill somewhere else in the equation. So I think we've got to have a conversation about that. I think we need to create the environment to make a sensible conversation possible, but it does get back to that thing I said, if you don't control the narrative, you don't get the right policy and don't get the right politics. So having the narrative right up front is absolutely critical.
Hey, two last questions, mindful of time. You spoke about the impact of reg change, both for good and the unintended impacts. Nick pointed out to the fact that we were at a global conference and this sense of global regulation, sometimes over-regulation, having unintended consequences. I kind of wondered whether you'd unpack that a little further for us,
Sure.
given your other earlier comments.
Yeah, it's really what I tried to do. Everything I did, by the way, in this financial services policy, I did with the prism of how's this going to impact a consumer or a class of consumers. And I looked at a bunch of the stuff we'd done in the area of financial advice as an example. And what we'd done is lay it up over, probably started in about 2010, earlier actually, 2008. But successive governments had solved the same problem, which is how do we keep consumers safe, about literally 10 different times. Has solved the same problem with a new bolt-on piece of regulation to deal with a political crisis or a scandal that had occurred. And what we'd done is created this Meccano set of regulation. Every single bit of it on its own made sense. But collectively, what it did was not only protect consumers from bad advice, it protected them from any advice. And nobody can say that that's a good outcome for an Australian. In the area of financial advice, they're retiring with, on average, $200,000 in their super today, and that'll grow. That's real money. We want them to make good decisions, not bad decisions with that money. And for most Australians, that requires getting access to information and advice, which you and your colleagues in other parts of the profession provide. We've got to create more of you. We've got to create more safe doors. We've got to ensure that it's appropriately regulated. And a part of that involves a dereg as well as a re-reg agenda.
By the way, we are very proud of our AFCA complaint numbers, but we won't...
I called that out, mate.
Thank you. We won't... Hey, look, last question, soft question. It's Monday morning. What does Minister Jones do on Monday morning?
Sleeping in.
Minister Jones do?
Sleeping in. No, for me, 7 o'clock is a sleeping. But no, look, I think the government will be returned, and I hope that is the case, because you need stability, but you also need, if any of the reforms we've talked about, any of the things that work, you actually need them to be bedded in. You don't need to be, it can't be like a Sydney train where it's all out, all change every stop. You need some stability, you need some continuity, and I think the government will be returned because it has got a good record. We're bringing inflation down, we've got full employment, we've got critical finances under control. I think we've got business investment coming back. So I think all the fundamentals are good, and I think on merits the government should be returned. I think that that's in the national interest. I think it's very uncertain times out there in the globe. I think we need stability and certainty. For me, I'll do something in the private sector. I'm not sure what yet. I'm going to give myself a couple of months off and work out what I do next. It's a promise I made to my family, and I'm going to stick to it. Yeah.
Well, it's been, like I said earlier, an absolute pleasure working with you over the years in different roles and guises. I'm going to invite Vice President Beck Wilson just to say a vote of thanks to you. But Minister, on behalf of all of us here, a huge big thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Richard, and good morning, everyone. Minister Jones, when you say stop doing dumb things, as an insurance broker, when we place complex risks, we say you need to think smart. So imagine if we stop doing dumb things and we think smart, what a perfect world we live in. But firstly, it's been many years, Minister Jones, that you've been to many NIBA events, whether it be our convention, events like this morning. So on behalf of the National Insurance Brokers Association, I wish to extend our sincerest gratitude for your invaluable contributions. As the Assistant Treasurer and Minister for Financial Services, your dedication and commitment to the financial services sector, and of course NIBA and our members and all insurance brokers, you have been truly commendable, and we deeply appreciate the impact, and I sincerely mean that, the impact that you have made. Your efforts in advocating and implementing policies that support the growth, stability within our profession are recognised by NIBA and our members. We are particularly appreciative of your engagement, as I said, with our association, and your willingness to listen and address any concerns that we've had. These concerns and the way that you have collaborated have been instrumental in the way that we have connected with you. I recall a moment at the convention in 2024 in Adelaide where you demonstrated remarkable insights during a Q&A session, particularly regarding the role of brokers as key client advocates. This instance stands as a testament to your deep comprehension and unwavering commitment to our sector. As this is one of your final events in the sector, I'd like to take the opportunity to wish you and your family the very best. Thank you for your invaluable contribution and service. We do hope that we do stay in touch, and we will make sure that that happens. To our members, we will continue to work with all areas of government to represent interest of the insurance broking community and their clients. But again, Minister Jones, we wish you all the best with your future endeavours. And I just wanted to make one point. Insurance broking is a private sector, so if you're interested in a couple of months' time, we'd love to hear from you. Please put your hands together for Minister Jones.
Thank you, Beck, and thank you, Minister. It's now my great pleasure to introduce our next member of our panel this morning, and that is Zali Steggall. Zali has served as the independent member for Warringah since 2019, but Zali, as many of you would know in the room today, her first career was as a professional skier, winning a bronze medal in the 1998 Winter Olympics. Zali's been awarded the Order of Australia for her contributions to sport, and also has been inducted into the Sporting Hall of Fame. To add to that first phase of Zali's career, prior to entering Parliament, Zali was a barrister. So since Zali's election in 2019, Zali's focused on climate change, which is a bit of a common theme here this morning, as well as integrity in government and gender equality. Zali was instrumental in the passing of the Climate Change Act and the National Anti-Corruption Act. Zali's been a strong advocate for small business, which many are represented here this morning, and tax reform. Zali particularly has got a strong interest in insurance affordability, which will be one of our focuses this morning, including recently releasing her $10 billion climate resilience plan, which outlines proposals to reduce climate risk and building greater climate resilience within our communities. And I think looking at Zali's website, this quote really epitomises where we are today. And that quote is that we have the courage to ensure that our children and their children do not look back on us as a generation that had all the facts and the data but did nothing.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. It's a rainy day, but this is such an important topic and you are such an important industry. I would like to start by acknowledging the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and their lands that we're meeting on today, and the respect for the elders, past and present. And despite some of the recent discussion in our national conversation and media, the importance of that is because that care for country is so vital. We don't have safe communities unless we have a safe country, and we have much to learn from First Nations Australia in that care for country. Also, Sydney is uniquely positioned between Sydney Cove and the large Port Jackson Bay, and those natural formations have long acted as protective barriers, shielding the land from some of the harshest natural elements. So for thousands of years, they help protect the Gadigal people. And even today, we see their calming effect. I've come over from Manly. I wasn't on the ferry because that wasn't going to cope today. But during severe storms, when the ocean is rough, the bay often remains calm enough, and hopefully ferries travel safely and keep business operating between the peninsulas and the city. But what we know is Sydney, like the rest of New South Wales and Australia, is facing increasing challenges from natural disasters. We've had, since 2019, since getting into politics, absolutely horrendous bushfires, and they don't just hit those communities where they're happening. They come all the way into the heart of Sydney and the CBD. We saw the bushfire smoke just absolutely blanketing our communities. We see violent storms, and the impacts are getting more and more frequent and more severe. So we've seen firsthand the impact of these disasters on our communities. And for all of you as insurance brokers, all of you here today, you play such a critical intermediary role between policyholders, insurance companies, and we have to try and address that protection gap that exists. Now, from that intro, I got into politics because I actually fundamentally want to keep communities safe. I can see that we have a massive risk on the horizon that we're simply not addressing. Our political system is not giving it the seriousness and the focus it absolutely should have. We see the intensity and frequency of natural disasters increasing, and so these conversations should be increasing, yet in recent weeks, how much attention has been given to this increasing risk in this election debate. The 2022 floods alone cost over $7 billion in insured losses, the most expensive natural disaster in Australian history. According to the Australian Institute, we now have 1 in 25 homes that could be uninsurable by 2030. Another survey indicated up to 1 in 5 homes were either uninsured or underinsured. This is a massive economic risk and problem. For small businesses, disruption from bushfires, floods, heat waves hurt supply chains, staffing, customer access. Business does not continue when you are repeatedly hit by disasters. Everything stops. So the idea that we can concentrate on just cost of living and economic manager without addressing all these factors that will disrupt everything is absolute lunacy. The impact, and it's cascading across sectors: hospitality, agriculture, tourism, retail. Every aspect of our economy will be impacted. I've had many journalists ask me that, is this the election for just cost of living and climate is further down the page of things that we should worry about? There is no such thing as one or the other. Climate risk is an economic risk that we have to manage. And it's not a distant concern. It's very much here. It was only a few weeks ago that we were shocked and horrified by the LA fires. And the news from those communities around the insurance question and the gap, the protection gap that they face is significant. But so have our leaders taken a leaf from what's happened over there, learnt the lesson, presented at this election a plan and a proposal to keep our communities safe? I would say no. It's been a very glaring gap in the discussion. Because we know it's not just the communities directly impacted that will bear the cost. Ultimately, the whole community shares the impact, because we know insurance premiums, the industry prices risk on a yearly basis, and as the risks for some communities go up, the premiums go up for everyone. And so the consequence of inaction and failing to mitigate that risk is that we are fast heading to an unaffordable problem, to an economic risk that is just massive. And so on the eve of an election, I haven't heard any significant commitments from either leaders around what are they genuinely going to do to mitigate that climate risk and build that resilience and adaptation. Now, we know that protection gap, Nick, as you outlined, that access and affordability. I always say to many people, the cheapest house is the house you only build once. So let's make sure we build it right, we build it with energy efficiency and climate resilience. Yet every policy announcement around increasing supply through building has failed to make a precondition that it should be climate resilient, that must be built into it. In fact, on the Coalition's webpage, there is a commitment to freeze construction codes for 10 years. Now, what that means is you have a whole sector of homes that will be built that will not be adapted to the times. That is reckless negligence. We have to treat climate resilience as an economic policy. That's why I've proposed a $10 billion climate resilience fund to ensure that high-risk communities can put in place safe and climate adaptation infrastructure to keep them safe. It means we actually need to partner with local government areas and help them. The Climate Council has estimated some 83 areas around Australia at high risk, and I know the New South Wales government's assessment identified 66 local government areas that are in financial distress and that are at high risk. And in fact, Minister Jones, Shell Harbour is one of the most high distressed from climate risk from that local government area. And what it means is those local governments have to onset that risk to residents. So residents pay it directly through their own premiums and have to carry that risk. They then have to pay for it through the levies they pay to local government. And then you have this increasing risk kind of pressure cooker that no one is really addressing when it comes to regulation. So for me, it is bewildering, the lack of focus on it, but that I think explains why I'm here. As an ex-sports person and as a barrister, I like the facts. I like it when we look at the issues and we genuinely engage with what are the things we can do to solve them. By having a climate resilience fund to actively invest in the measures that we can do, whether it's pumps, whether it's levies, whether it's better infrastructure, stormwater infrastructure to avoid flooding. It was only a couple of years ago that Manly Corso was under 30 centimetres of water because we had the combination of a high tide with a massive rain bomb. And we know those events are going to happen more and more often. I want to see the National Construction Code updated. We cannot be building more supply of housing without having affordable but climate resilient and energy efficient housing. I also think we desperately need a national climate risk and adaptation legislation. We have to have legislated that the government of the day must have, on a regular basis, national climate risk plan, adaptation risk assessments so that we know the areas that need attention, and at arm's length a requirement to provide plans, adaptation plans to meet those risks. It's quite interesting, we often hear about keeping communities safe by major parties and it's always wrapped up into sort of crime or national security or even foreign geopolitical issues. But our biggest safety factor is actually at home, and that is, everyone is quite silent on it. So that is legislation I'll be putting, and I'm committing to, if I have a job after Saturday, to keep focusing on that. We need informed long-term plans to safeguard communities. And we know it's a whole economy issue. Policymakers, insurers, brokers, small business, as well as communities, local government, state government, everyone needs to be at the table. No one lever is going to solve this, but we have to, on one hand, mitigate the problem. We have to reduce emissions. We have to get ambitious when it comes to our 2035 targets with the nationally determined contribution. Anyone heard anyone commit anything for the next commitment to the Paris Agreement in the context of this election? Very lacking. But then we have to build that adaptation and resilience. Sadly, we know so much warming is baked in and we have to get to that job. So for me, I absolutely welcome ongoing engagement with NIBA. I know you are focused on improving climate resilience of local economies, making insurance fairer and more accessible. We need to build a future-ready Australia, and that must be at the core of the focus. So I would say to everybody, if you are serious about protecting our economy, we've got to be serious about addressing climate risk. And that means you have to make sure insurance is accessible and affordable. We need to close that protection gap, not let it get wider and wider as it goes. Providing homeowners and small businesses and local government areas with certainty and coverage that they need to invest in the future must be a first priority. There is no conversation of sensible economic management without addressing climate risk. So I have pledged to be a champion on this front when it comes to the Parliament. I have many colleagues that are as well. And I urge you as a sector to keep raising your voice and demand this of government. It is essential for our future economic prosperity and physical safety. Thank you.
Thank you, Zali, and really appreciate those comments. And I wanted to dig a bit more into the climate resilience plan. And particularly, and we're all very well aware of it, so you're speaking to people who are really in line with what you're talking about, is as we see this increased severity and increased frequency, how do you see local authorities, local, state, federal, so all three tiers, assisting those communities, because we can replace the built environment, but it's also the social environment. It's the resilience of those communities to actually stay in those places. So how do you see your plan, and what are you looking for from those three levels to, sure, let's address the built environment, but how do we deal with the social impact as well?
Absolutely. I mean, we unfortunately, the media and, you know, the nationals the attention of the nation is it's a short attention span. So you focus in on a community when it's being hit by a disaster, you get the quick media grabs, and then the cavalcade moves on. But those communities are left picking up the pieces, and there's the physical structural aspect, like you say, of rebuilding, and that's where the industry is essential to be, you know, very focused on that delivery and prompt and support. But there is the long-term scars. There is the post-traumatic stress. We know communities hit by successive bushfires have much higher rate of mental health, of real issues around school attendance for children, for example, which has a long-term productivity impact for those communities of finishing school. I mean, things that it's hard to always think about the level of detail, but I've talked to organisations like Bushfire Survivors for Climate Change, and they have given me the data around every summer when they get repeated, just even a warning that there is a risk of bushfires, schools get for example, will start closing early, which means kids stay home, which means parents stay home to mind the kids, which means you have business coming to a standstill. So the idea that this is restricted to a few events that happen and I think the leader of the opposition just the other day was saying, look, we've always had bushfires and floods, and Australia is a continent where it's always happened, we just kind of live with it. The reality is the frequency at which it is happening, the severity at which it is happening, stops a community in their tracks. And so then you have the question of, do you physically build them somewhere safer? We can look at that. Very costly, but we can look at that. But the emotional scar, the emotional loss of productivity is really hard to quantify, but it is massive. Yeah. And that's why so many communities are crying out for this problem to be taken seriously, to be put centre stage in government's plans and economic management.
Exactly. And so how do we then balance, because the other side of the conversations we're hearing certainly through the last 5 weeks is affordability of housing. And we need to prepare better built environments, and, you know, your comment around building it once, doing it right is so valid. But how do we balance that increased risk management or mitigation at the time of building a house or finding a place to build houses with the affordability that is so tough, particularly here in Sydney for a lot of young people?
Absolutely, and we have to look at that in a smart way. I love the use of smart. I look for smart solutions. But it doesn't always have to add huge amounts of cost. Building quality should always be better than building cheap. And yes, affordability is a conversation we have to have, and there are a lot of levers that we can pull around affordability. And it isn't just a question of supply. There has to be other issues as well. But when we look at the building codes, for example, and when I've had briefings from the Insurance Council of Australia around, areas where you are at risk of, and I know all of you know this, but for me it was new, being told that, for example, ensuring that roofs are, put in with a certain size screws or bolts, of a greater size makes them more cyclone proof. Now, that means your risk of losing your roof in a storm is decreased significantly, and that should be reflected in your insurance premiums. I want to bring the banking sector and the insurance sector to the table with government around how do we mitigate risk and make this affordable, close that protection gap. Because banks are very exposed, right? We all have to sign away that we have insurance at the time of taking out a mortgage, but they don't check back in for the next 30 years unless you are refinancing. They know they've got an iceberg on their books. They don't know how many people, their customers, homeowners are underinsured or uninsured. So they need to be at the table as well to make, for example, have better terms of lender, mortgages more affordable, where a house has mitigated climate risk and where a client, a customer, has taken those steps. And that's what the Resilience Fund can do, is through the Resilient Building Scheme, which is a small pilot scheme at the moment but can be expanded, and I'm calling for that, to help advise homeowners how they build in resilience in what they're doing. Build smart from the start. And obviously where you build and LGAs and planning is a very important issue as well. But things like, where do you put your power sockets? If you're in a flood-prone zone, power sockets should be higher up the wall so that they're less at risk of being flooded and all of your electricals go in that process. There are so many practical measures that can be built into the system that will mitigate risk and costs of repair and replacement.
And Zali, we've had your climate resilience plan leading into this election phase, and most recently yesterday, Zurich, Alex Morgan put out a paper around climate resilient housing, calling on more to be done from that. But why do you think this isn't a conversation that's happening? Because it's really impacting voters wherever they might be, and the broader cost to communities.
Why are we not talking about enough? Well, I think there's a pretty concerted effort by fossil fuel interests to delay that conversation, right? The less you talk about it, the less you talk about the size of the problem, how much it's going to cost us all, the less you get motivated to do something about it and accelerate transition. And it's a false premise to think that focusing on cost of living now is somehow okay and not addressing this issue, because every aspect of our cost of living is made worse by climate risk, right? Your food will go, the cost of food will go up, your cost of transport will go up, you'll have less housing security, all those issues are interlinked. And yet very little focus on it. You know, a lot of talk about economic management, not much talk about actually acknowledging those risks, and the fact that those risks are very real for the next 5 to 10 years, right? These are not long-term issues, they are risks now of how much it's going to cost. At the last budget, one single event, ex-cyclone Alfred, is estimated to have cost about 13 billion to the budget. Now, that's 1 week of events, right? So that's pretty massive impact. You start thinking that with every degree of warming, 7% more humidity in the atmosphere, and everything accelerates and exacerbates. We are in for a shocker unless we start acting.
Totally. The $10 billion figure that's mooted, how do you see that being funded, and how do we avoid it being caught up in the inertia of a planning process and administrative process?
That's very important, because obviously only a few weeks ago we had a lot of talk about fiscal deficit for the next 10 years, not much focus on budget repair over the course of this election campaign. It's through a 3-year phase out of the fossil fuel excise subsidy for mining.
Okay.
Over the 3 years, we can reallocate $10 billion of public spending to a climate resilience fund and still come out of it with $1.5 billion positive to the budget. So if all those expenses of mining and transport were simply paid for and then used as a tax deductibility, it's a business expense. So it's still coming off the books of mining and transport, right? It's still getting covered as an expense. You come out with $1.5 billion benefit to the budget because they're getting a cream on top through that excise. They are getting more back through that excise rebate than what it actually would cost if they paid for it and claimed it. I find that is obscene. When we are talking about fiscal repair to our budget, we absolutely need to look at what are we prioritising? Where are we spending public money? We have to stop always focusing on taxing individuals through their efforts, right? I've had a few disagreements with the Minister on some of those areas, in particular on superannuation, and we need to start looking at more holistically where public money is being spent, and fuel excise, for example, is one that just has to be phased out. It is inefficient, it is unacceptable use of public money.
Fast forward to Sunday morning or even Monday morning, we have a new parliament. You might be getting a few phone calls, but let's see how that transpires. But Zali, I'm interested in what are the 3 things, as you're now looking forward to a new parliament, that you're looking to achieve over the course of this next session of Parliament?
Absolutely. Look, when I came in on 2019, my big focus was climate change. Taking on Tony Abbott, it was about we needed to get a firm commitment to net zero by 2050. We got that. We pushed Labor to legislate it. It was legislated, first action of the 2022, after the 2022 election. So I welcome that. We have to do resilience, right? We have to continue with the mitigation piece. I want to see ambitious targets and transition of our sector to clean energy and low emission technologies. But we have to build resilience and adaptation. So for me, that is a core commitment to make sure we get those national adaptation risk assessments and adaptation plans. That legislation needs to be passed. We know actually the government is currently sitting on a national climate risk assessment that was done by the Climate Authority, but I believe it's not being released because there is no plan or budget to address that risk. So it will be after the election we will find out what that risk assessment is. I don't think that's good enough. I think the Australian people should know ahead of time the risks that they face domestically and abroad around their safety and security. So that's a core promise, but fiscal discipline and integrity and accountability remain there. I want to see budget repair. I want to see smart spending of public money, reallocation of our priorities to support Australians to do the best we can. I'm an athlete, ex-athlete. I love winning. I want Australia to be on the podium getting that gold medal, but we have to be smart and we do have to embrace change and progress.
Thank you. Zali, thank you so much for joining us in what is a busy time, but coming to the end of a busy 5 weeks, I'm sure. We're really looking forward to working further with you and building on our conversation this morning. So we're very much looking forward to that. Ladies and gentlemen, can you please join me in thanking Zali Steggall?
Thank you. Thanks,
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for that, Zali. Delighted now to welcome Senator Andrew Bragg to the podium for his stump and then a conversation. Senator Bragg has served as Liberal Senator for New South Wales since 2019. He has long been a strong voice in the financial services debate. Prior to entering Parliament, Senator Bragg held several senior positions at the Financial Services Council and at the Business Council of Australia. And since entering Parliament, he's taken a strong interest in super, technology, financial regulation and housing. In March of 2024, Andrew was appointed as Shadow Assistant Minister for Home Ownership. He's also authored a number of books, and please join me in welcoming Senator Bragg.
Thanks, Richard. Good morning to you all. It's very nice to be here at the back end of this election campaign. I would say to you, to cut to the chase, that the reason that the government has not been successful on the economic policy front is because they have been too focused on the issues that affect the people that they are close to. So they have spent 3 years trying to work out how they can line the coffers of the unions and the big super funds with money and also favourable policy outcomes, rather than solve the great challenges of the day. And that is why we are facing a housing and energy crisis, and that is why we are having a national election campaign about the cost of living, because the government have made things so much harder on the housing and on the energy front. So I will spare you the political talking points, but I did want to make that point to you at the outset. That is why I think the government has failed on the economy. And you would have heard from the government earlier that their priorities are the priorities of the unions and the super funds, the people who are currently manning the polling places, running their pre-selections and funding their election campaigns. And that's why there's been no progress on the financial advice issues. That's why there's been no progress on financial services reform. That's why there's been no progress on getting the regulators to do their jobs. That's why there's been regulators stepping into the shoes of policymakers when they really should run for Parliament and go through the fantastic process that is of putting yourself up for election. So in terms of the financial advice changes, we do want to see a clearer line between personal advice and general advice. We want to see the supply of financial advisors come back, because we understand that, like any other market, this is a supply and demand equation. And right now we have constrained the amount of financial advisors to the point where the average income earner can't afford to get financial advice, and that is extremely dangerous. So we must remedy that. That would be a high priority for us. We also want to avoid crazy Soviet Union-style taxation solutions like the unrealised gains proposal, which you may have heard about. Now, this unrealised gains proposal, I assume, is that known to everyone? Do people know about that? Does anyone not know about the unrealised gains issue? Okay. The government have a plan to tax unrealised gains in superannuation, which means that if you make a paper profit, you've got to pay tax on it. So if the value of an asset goes up, you pay tax on it even though you haven't sold the property or the asset or the share. Now, it might go down, so you might have to pay tax on something which is going to reduce in value. So this is absolutely insane sort of stuff. And so if the government is returned on Saturday, they will most likely be in coalition with the Greens, and they have a policy position to change the unrealised gains proposal so that it applies to a whole lot of assets. So it might apply to the family home, it might apply to non-super assets. So this is extremely dangerous territory. Finally, I want to give you some assurance that if we are elected, that we will make sure that the regulators focus on doing their job, which is to enforce the law, not to make policy. And I think what we've seen over the last 3 years is a weekend at Bernie's style government where the regulators have done whatever they want without any real interest or attention from the government, which has been so focused on helping out their best friends at the union movement. So does anyone know Weekend at Bernie's anymore, or is that sort of a bit of an old guy reference? Who doesn't know Weekend at Bernie's? Okay, you all know Weekend at Bernie's. What are you talking about? That's good. All right, well, so as I said, I won't bore you with the political talking points, but I do think that if we are elected, we will deliver the advice changes. You won't see any crazy taxation changes, and we will make sure that the regulators are squarely focused on enforcing the law, not trying to create new laws given that they haven't been elected by anyone. I look forward to your questions.
Senator Bragg, punchy as ever. Weekend at Bernie's is a great show. So thank you for those.
It was filmed in Canberra.
It was?
No.
There you go. Folks, as ever, Slido questions coming through, so please keep them coming through. I just wanted to pick up a couple of things. You were sitting here 2 days out from the election. How's your side of the House feeling about, come Saturday, what it looks like, what the options are?
Yeah. Well, look, I think the national polls at this stage are pretty meaningless. I think we're looking at a series of seat-by-seat contests, and in the last couple of days I've been in Macarthur and Warringah, which is in the southwest of Sydney. So yesterday I was in Campbelltown, the day before in Liverpool, and we're very confident of doing well in those seats. After this I'm going to Bennelong, which is in the ride through to sort of Lane Cove area of Sydney, and we're confident there. So I think we're going to do well here in New South Wales, and I think overall we'll be competitive, very competitive in Victoria. So I'm optimistic that we'll pick up a number of seats on Saturday.
You spoke in your comments about regulation and role of regulation and regulators. We asked this question to Minister Jones.
Yep.
It seems to be kind of a global conversation around the role of regulation is to safeguard consumers and have orderly markets and so on and so forth. And if there's over-regulation, there's a bunch of unintended consequences. Cost goes up, the numbers of advisors go down and so on. What's your view on how we get the balance right in that regard?
Well, look, I hope you don't mind that I gave a bit of a shorter address, but I know people get bored easily, and you've already heard a lot of people talk, and so I know people fall asleep easily. So the answer to the question is that we live in a society where regulators are supposed to do the role that Parliament sets for them, okay? The idea that we live in a country where we have to defer all good common sense and everything, all judgments to a regulator is really dangerous and lazy thinking. Sure, they might have some good insights, but ultimately they're there to enforce the law. And the fact that this government hasn't given ASIC a statement of expectations in 3 years shows that they really are a bit like Weekend at Bernie's. I mean, I don't know what they've been doing, but I really worry about that. I don't want to be overly negative about the regulators, because I do think that generally they are trying to be earnest, they are trying to do the right thing, but it's not choose your own. The regulators don't live in a choose your own adventure book. And so I think they should have been given much clearer focus on what they were supposed to focus on and what they weren't supposed to do. And so, you know, it may be a very nice cerebral academic exercise for ASIC to go and do a report on private credit. But I mean, why can't they put some of these crooks in jail who ripped off all these people, and now we've got this compensation scheme of last resort? I mean, you see phoenixing go unpunished. You see now a taxpayer-funded organisation, I'll be careful with my words here. You've now got a compensation scheme of last resort, which the industry is now funding because the regulators haven't bothered to do their job. And I just think this is now a long and boring answer. I'm sorry, Richard, but I do want to make this point that I think one of the transaction costs of having a lot of political assassinations and then a lot of, I don't mean that literally, and then a lot of ministers churning through is that, generally speaking, we haven't had a minister in that area that could really steady the ship and really focus it. I mean, Jones is a nice guy, but I think he's been more interested in how he can help out the industry super funds.
I'll come back to a couple of those things. The iPad's going nuts on a couple of particular questions, which I think is worth exploring.
Sure.
And it goes to some comments the opposition leader made around the breakup of insurers to reduce costs of insurance.
Yep.
And the flip on that is that the sector's highly competitive. I was kind of interested in your comments on both the opposition leader's observations, but also the sector's view and basically consumers' views on how to get access to good advice and also price of insurance.
So, just to be clear, I mean, the divestiture stuff on supermarkets is not the same regime that would apply to any other sector. And so we would look only to that extreme measure if there were ongoing failings in the sector. It's not the first tool you'd take out of the bag. And I think we would want to work with the industry to work out how we could reduce costs to consumers, and I understand that mitigation is a big part of that. I understand that regulation is a big part of that. I'm sure that there is a deregulation agenda here that we could work with the industry on to strip cost out. Deregulation is more than just public servants not being employed in the same numbers or anything else. Deregulation is about finding regulation which retards investment and increases cost to consumers, and then stripping that out. But it's got to be done in a way which isn't going to erode consumer protections. So you've got to learn the lessons of the past, and I think that I would start with what is the industry's agenda on deregulation and how much of that could we do as a first step, plus mitigation.
Let me just push you on this point.
Yep.
In terms of the opposition leader's comments, I mean, what's your was the context about insurance affordability, or what do you think was behind that? How concerned as a sector should we be about those comments, or is there more context?
Well, I think it would be the last step at the end of a very long process, and I don't think we'll get there because I think the other steps we can deliver on, particularly around cost reduction through dereg and also through mitigation. It would not be our preference to ever have that on our list of legislation. But ultimately, I guess you've got to make points that make people focused, and these are important issues to Australians. The costs are high. We need to work out what can we do so effectively there would be three buckets, right? So what are the cost pressures that government can relieve? what are the cost pressures that industry can relieve, and then individual businesses need to do whatever they can do to reduce costs, because the cost of insurance is incredibly high right now in all relative terms. So that's how we would look at it, and then we would only take any drastic steps if those had all failed. But I'm confident that we can work well with this industry.
Perhaps just extending that thought a little further, which is really around climate resilience and the challenges that we're collectively facing. I think both Minister Jones and Zali made the point that this is a really front and centre an economic issue.
Yeah.
It's not just a climate issue.
That's right.
Completely. What's your perspective? What's the opposition's perspective on then how we address some of those issues?
Well, that's right. I mean, environmental risks are economic risks, and they should be priced into everything. And that's always been my view. So that's why we're committed to net zero by 2050.
Fantastic. Let me just go to the iPad. A few questions then on advice. You've been very vocal in your term around the area of advice. What does good advice look like to you? And how do we make sure that broking as a profession kind of sits front and centre, helping Australians make really good decisions?
Well, we want people to be able to get general advice without having to necessarily pay for personal advice to start with. I think we want to have a clean line there. And then in terms of personal advice, we want it to be fairly charged on the basis that it is providing people information about their own personal circumstances, and we want it to be accessible to everyone. I mean, right now it's becoming a rich person's thing. So again, it's the same point about insurance affordability. There's a massive regulatory cost here of getting advisors into the system. And so that's why we need to progress some of these issues. I'm not convinced that the levy reforms are exactly right, but we need to consult with the sector. But directionally, we need to work out a way to increase the supply very quickly.
So just on that's around talent in the sector. There's obviously an advice gap. There's an insurance gap. What's your sense about how we address those, how we plug those?
Well, in the short term, it's about getting more advisors into the system. I mean, ultimately, the insurance in super can be, look, I'll be honest with you, I think the insurance in super for a lot of average income earners with a couple of kids and a mortgage is junk. And I worry that people, particularly in Sydney, where house prices are high, cost of living is high, that people might assume that their super insurance is going to cover them if they have a catastrophe. And as I say, with a couple of kids and a big Sydney mortgage, it won't. And so I really worry that I don't like paternalism to start with. I'm a bit more of a libertarian, I guess, Richard. But we want people to sit in front of a financial advisor, look at their personal circumstances, and then give them the insurance that they need for them. That's where we've got to get to. So there's no way around this. We need the advice system to operate properly.
And from a broking profession perspective, what's your insights about how we help the profession of broking grow, be better, connect in with more consumers? How does the opposition see that playing through?
Well, I mean, what do you think are the major barriers?
Quick answer, and we're running out of time, but keen on your views. I mean, the main issue is around scale and talent. People joining the sector, seeing insurance broking and insurance as a sector that's attractive that they want to join into, and ultimately helping the sector grow to serve ultimately more Australians.
Well, look, it is a great sector, and it's a very important part of the financial sector, and the financial and professional services sectors are a great part of the Australian economy. And directionally, I would say to you that we are big believers in insurance. And that's why I really bristle at the idea that the government now wants to become the insurer of all mortgages through their Lenders Mortgage Insurance Scheme, which would be run by the Commonwealth, where Clive Palmer's children could get access to that scheme. And so that will crowd out and ultimately destroy and collapse, I'm sure, the lenders' mortgage insurance sector. So we don't believe that the government should be in the business of insurance. We're the Liberal Party, we don't believe in that. And so we want your sector to work. It's very important because you are privatising risk. And so that is very laudable and to be supported, will be supported by us. And so for people who work in the sector, we're very, very grateful for your efforts. We don't want to shrink your sector, we want it to grow because given the ageing population and other demographic challenges we face as a nation and budgetary and fiscal challenges we face, we need you more than ever.
Hey, look, last question. It's 2 days before the election.
Yep.
How are you feeling about Saturday and what are you going to be doing on Monday morning?
I don't know, it depends on how Saturday goes. I'll be on the south coast in Gilmore on the weekend. That's a key marginal seat for us. I have to say it's one of the most beautiful parts of New South Wales, so I guess I've chosen to go to the best part of the state, or one of the best parts of the state. It's a close seat there. Andrew Constance is running for the Liberals, and we're confident of picking that up. And assuming that we have done a good job on Monday morning, we'll be reading our incoming government brief, I imagine.
On that note, Senator Bragg, thank you for taking the time. Best of luck over the weekend and really appreciate you joining us this morning. And on behalf of everyone here, a big thank you.
Thanks, mate.
Thank you very much.
Well.
Thank you very much. Folks, we're going to go dive straight into our last session for the morning. It'll be short, sharp and punchy. And I'm delighted to welcome up the NIBA Government Relations consulting team from Counsel House, Mick Veitch and his colleague Leigh from Canberra. Good morning, gents. We're absolutely delighted to welcome the Counsel House team. It's one of the reasons why we're here today with their guidance and their counsel. And I was going to actually ask them to introduce themselves. They have a rich and storied background. And Mick, I might start with you.
Thanks, Richard. So I eclectic background. I was a shearer. I worked in the disability sector. I was the CEO of a very large not-for-profit and finished up in the New South Wales Parliament in 2007. Spent 16 years in the Parliament, 12 of those on the front bench for the Labor Party. And at every election, someone misses out. And in 2023, I was the only shadow minister not to get their seat. Wasn't re-elected, so I didn't get to be a minister. And all my colleagues, all my former mates are now ministers of the Crown in New South Wales. But that brought me to Counsel House, and there's a fair bit of experience and insight that I can bring around the political processes that people like Richard now draw upon.
So there's definitely life after politics.
I just said to Minister Jones, who's a mate of mine, I just said, you have no idea. You will have dinner at home. You won't be going to weekend events. You'll be able to duck off and have weekends on your own. You'll be in bed by 9. You'll be up by 7. You have no idea what life after politics is like.
Fantastic. We'll unpack that a little bit further. Leigh Moran, welcome, and tell us your story.
Thank you, Richard. I also took the scenic route to get here. My first career was actually engineering. I moved to Canberra from sunny Queensland to start my career as a communications engineer in defence, and I was there for a few years. After that, I went into consulting. I was at a different firm, moved into banking. I was at the Customer and Banking Association there for 5 years. Then I moved into superannuation funds management with Vanguard before I got the call I couldn't refuse at Counsel House. So here I am.
Fantastic. So welcome, guys. This is the pundit session. So we've now heard from Labor, from the Libs and an independent. This session's really designed as so what do we hear, what do we think? Leigh, I'll start with you. What do we hear and what do we think?
Well, staying on our sector, I was really appreciative that the comments that they made were really quite broadly a lot of the cost pressures on insurance premiums, and that is natural disasters and climate change. All three speakers did touch on that, and quite significantly so in the case of Zali. But they also touched on, especially Senator Bragg, on regulatory cost pressures as well. But between the two of those, that is what forms such a large part of premium price increases as well. So all three of them being in many ways lockstep behind understanding what is driving premium price increases, I think is really quite important. And I think it was Minister Jones that said, you never want your industry to be on the CPI figures, and you're thinking about cost of living this election being the number 1, 2 and 3 priority of voters. What are people thinking about about the most? What do people see in terms of cost of living? They go to the supermarket, they pay groceries, they pay their rental, they pay their mortgage, and they're paying their insurance premiums, sometimes quarterly, and therefore they're seeing it much more regularly than some of the other CPI price factors.
Mick, what did you see and what did you hear?
Look, can I just say, Richard, it's interesting, in politics, often the major parties will use different words to talk about the same issue. It's their point of difference, but in fact they're talking about the same thing. And they all work to their 4 or 5 issues going into an election: cost of living, climate change. And what was important today was how those issues all intertwine. Like, they're actually not separate items. They actually intertwine and sort of work across the whole spectrum. I think there's a couple other observations I make. I think the 3 of them look a little tired. They're 2 days out from polling day. They're all heading off now to spend a very long day on a pre-poll booth somewhere. If it's in Sydney, they're probably going to get wet while they do it. And I think the question around, what will you do on Monday morning? I think all of them will be just looking for a bit of a sleep in. But they did look a bit tired and a bit jaded. But that's a 5-week campaign. I think Minister Jones said feels like 5 years. I think he's glad he's not a part of that 5-week campaign in a lot of ways.
So it really is. I mean, unpack for us. Last 5 weeks, it's marathon stuff, right?
Oh.
Every day.
Yeah.
Like what? Multiple things happening every day.
So once the election's called, MPs in particular, particularly ministers and shadow ministers, will get by on about 4 hours sleep every night for seven nights a week. Their days are very early. They're up doing media calls. They're going across a whole range of issues that may be the issue of the day. They've got a campaign in their own seats as well, and independent members have a very similar timetable. But also, any candidate who's contesting will also discover they have to get by on adrenaline, often don't eat. Your mind is always switched on, which can be very tiring. And so, the longer the campaign goes, the more likely you are to make a mistake. I mean, you can accidentally step off the back of a stage if you're not careful, or your bus might get stuck somewhere in one of the Sydney streets. But they're things that happen during a campaign if you're not paying attention.
And Leigh, how would you rate this campaign? How do you think the parties have performed over this kind of 5 weeks of the campaign?
I think the Labor side in particular, it's been a real business as usual campaign, that they've hit all the right marks. They've tried a few new things as well, but within a relatively controlled environment. And by new things, I mean that they really are trying that new media. And every election cycle, people talk about new media. I must admit, like early elections that I was involved in, people would talk about this new thing called social media, and maybe politicians should get behind that too. But now we're thinking about podcasts as well. Like Zoomers and millennials as a cohort are now the largest voting bloc in the country, and they outnumber boomers by a fairly significant margin. So the way to reach them is through the medium that they're consuming. That they're consuming TikTok and they're consuming podcasts, sometimes long form as well. So Anthony Albanese has guest starred on quite a large number of podcasts compared to Peter Dutton. Peter Dutton still has. He's joined a couple of podcasts, but not quite as many. Other than that, on the Labor side, I'll stick to generally bread and butter campaign, doing all the big stops, all the media appearances, the leader doing the leader things, all the local MPs doing their local events. They're turning up to, all the local community groups, and they're going out door knocking. Their knuckles are probably quite red from all the door knocking from that. Liberal campaign, we've all seen there's been a fair few missteps, I think it's pretty fair to say. But there's a lot of the campaign that we're not seeing. We're not seeing here in Sydney. We're not seeing here at that national sort of level. There's a lot of grassroots campaigning. There's a lot in the outer metro seats, which Peter Dutton has been quite firmly targeting. Plus, there's a lot of other things going on in terms of the minor parties. The primary vote at both majors is at historic levels, historically low levels. Sorry.
Like 30, 34, 35%, something like that?
Yeah, something like that. And realistically, they win elections or in the 40s, and they're just not anymore. I was reflecting that Labor's primary vote in 2016 was higher than it was in 2019, which was higher again than 2022. 2022 is when they won the election, with a lower primary vote than the 2 subsequent elections to that. That's the state of the world that we're in, that the minor parties are now such a large part of the ticket, and their preferences will decide dozens and dozens and dozens of seats. So if you look at the national polls, you say, well, look, based upon the campaign, based upon polling, you'd say Labor's probably a shoo-in at minority government at the very least, and potentially majority government. But there's just so much going on under the surface, so we may not see until election night.
And those deals take place well out of the limelight.
Well, out of the limelight. I mean, you know, you find out when you see their how to vote cards on election day, and the plucky volunteers will give it to you and say, there you go, please vote this way. And you go, oh, okay, it's like this now. But voters generally will, decide their own preferences one way or another. Conservative tickets are generally a little bit more loyal, I think. So by that, I mean, previously One Nation preference flows have gone to the Liberals, I think, for 60-ish% or so. Apparently, that's much higher now in this election, based upon pre-poll data and based upon some push polling that's been done. So that might be a fair bit higher.
Hey, just quick one. I was doing some research last night, just picking up your generational thing. So it looks like different generations in the Australian population are kind of tending into certain kind of voting patterns. Wonder if you had any observations on that one.
Yeah, so generally speaking, you'd expect younger voters to be voting more progressively, and then as they age out, they become a little bit more conservative, and that's generally speaking true, but it's a little bit more on the gender divide as well. So you're finding young men are voting much more conservatively and much earlier voting much more conservatively versus young women who are voting more progressively and staying more progressive in their voting intentions as they get into their 30s, 40s and 50s as well. I think that's quite an interesting dynamic in the Australian politics. I think I'd want to see a couple more election cycles before saying this is a big long-term trend and this is going to set Australian politics forever. This might be a blip. This might be a testament to the way that we're consuming new media like TikTok. This might be certain influences on social media having an impact on people's short-term voting preferences. And it might be the Trump effect. I don't think any of the three speakers mentioned Donald Trump this morning, but Donald Trump has been a shadow looming over this election as well.
I was going to come to that in a moment, but Mick, just picking up that same theme, but with a regional flavour. You're from the beautiful snowy mountains. Is there a difference between the city and the bush in terms of generational voting and kind of how this plays out in terms of preferencing and so on?
Yeah, it's a good point. And yes, thank you for pointing out that, Jim, it's one of the nicest parts of the world. So regional voters tend to vote more conservative normally. There's been demographic change. You'll note in New South Wales, for instance, now in the New South Wales Parliament, that the Labor Party hold most of, not all, but most of the seats going south from here heading down to the Victorian border. And there's a demographic change on the far north coast as well. That's why the Greens are now interested in the seat of Richmond, for instance. They think they have a chance there. So west of the dividing range, where the seats are getting geographically very, very big and hard to service if you're the elected member, they tend to be more conservative. Younger voters there, there's a similar pattern, but it does depend on whether they've come to Sydney to school and go home, or whether they've been schooled in the region. So there's a few things like that will influence their vote.
Just Leigh mentioned the T word. How big has the Trump effect played out in this election?
I think, as Leigh said, there's a shadow hanging over it. I mean, the Canadian election produced a result, and they're sort of pointing to the Trump impact. I think Australians have a view about Donald Trump, which very early, if you didn't read that message very early on, it would be easy just to either fall in behind Trump or immediately oppose Trump. The reality is people are being elected to represent their seats, their electorates in the federal parliament, and the federal parliament's being elected to look after the good and welfare of Australia. Trump has a part to play in that, but it's not the total part. And I think it's easy to look for something that might be a problem, but my view is it's been a shadow hanging over the top of the election, but hasn't always affected the election.
Hey, look, last question. The polls are saying Labor, the betting markets are saying Labor. What are you guys observing and saying, Leigh?
I'd probably still say Labor, with the caveat that I mentioned before, that there's a lot of stuff going on that we can't see from our vantage point right now. And also the old system was that if consumer confidence was below 90, the government changes. Consumer confidence right now is about 85. When the government changed last time, it was 84. So it's barely moved since then. So people are still quite unhappy. That's the concern that you'd have if you were in the Labor camp right now. But all other factors point towards a Labor victory.
Mick?
Yeah, look, they talk about a path to government. What's the pathway to government? I think Albanese and the Labor Party can see a pathway to government. I think Dutton has a shimmer on the far horizon for his path. I think at the start of the election, I said it would be. I still thought it was going to be a minority Labor government. I'm still of the view that it's a minority Labor government. However, it wouldn't surprise me. Some seats would be lost, some seats would be won, and we finish up with pretty much the status quo in the federal parliament, and it's a majority government. That wouldn't surprise me either.
And folks, on that note, let's bring our morning to a close by saying a big thank you to the Counsel House team, not only for their insights, but in helping to put this the show together. Can I also thank everyone for being in the room, and in particular our partners at CGU, who've been a principal partner for this event. And on that note, a big round of applause for everybody.
Well done.